Ever imagine like having a digital twin? Running around and doing all the like boring everyday stuff.
Yeah, like in those sci-fi movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today, but instead of like personal digital twins, we're talking about digital twins for entire laboratories.
No, it sounds crazy.
It does sound a little out there, but there's this group of university students, and they put together this really fascinating proposal for how to make this work.
Yeah, it's not just like some pie-in-the-sky idea either. They've actually thought through a lot of the details.
Right, and that's what we're going to dig into today. So basically, their vision is for this like self-managing lab of the future where AI is handling all the data crunching and the experiments are constantly optimizing
And it
themselves.
frees up the researchers to actually, do the research.
Exactly. So we're going to break down their proposal,
Yeah.
look at what this vertical operating system they're talking about actually is, see if it really has the potential to like revolutionize research.
And maybe even imagine what our own work days would look like if we had a team of virtual lab assistants, just taking care of everything.
Okay, so to set the scene, imagine yourself in a typical lab today. You know, beakers, mubbling centrifuges, whirring, and somewhere in all of that, there's a researcher hunched over their computer, manually entering data from like a stack of lab notebooks.
I'm probably not very happy about it.
Right. It's a pretty familiar picture, I think.
And that's exactly what the students are getting at in their proposal. They're basically saying this traditional workflow, it's just not cutting it anymore.
Because it's so inefficient.
Yeah. All that manual data entry and report generation and analysis, it takes forever, and it's so prone to errors.
It's a huge bottleneck to progress.
Exactly. And they're proposing this idea of a digital twin for the entire lab as the solution.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? A digital twin of the lab?
So it's like a virtual copy of the physical lab running in parallel, capturing every single data point, every measurement, every experiment in real time.
So it's not just like a simulation, it's actually connected to the real lab.
Right. And the really cool part is that it's not just mirroring the physical lab, it's actively interacting with it.
Okay, now that's where I start to get a little lost. How does that work?
So the proposal goes into detail about how sensors in the lab would feed data directly into the digital twin, and then the digital twin could actually use that data to adjust experimental parameters on the fly.
So it's like the lab is constantly learning and adapting based on what's happening in real time.
Exactly. It makes the whole process so much more dynamic and responsive.
Okay, but how does it actually learn and adapt? They keep mentioning these lab NPCs. Are we talking like actual video game characters running around in a virtual lab?
Well, they use the term playfully, but the concept is actually pretty sophisticated. Imagine instead of a researcher manually recording a temperature, reading a sensor, automatically feeds that data into the digital twin.
Okay.
And then a specific lab NPC, which is essentially a piece of software program for this task, takes the data, logs it, and might even trigger a response based on preset parameters.
So it's like having a team of virtual assistants, each with a specific job to do.
Exactly. And that's what makes the students' proposal so interesting. They've actually outlined specific roles for these NPCs, creating a sort of virtual lab team.
Okay, so tell me about this virtual lab team.
All right, so you've got the lab boss, who's responsible for overall management of the digital twin, making sure everything runs smoothly. Then you have the slave NPC, and yes, they do use that term, which is responsible for handling all the raw data coming in, translating it into a usable format, and organizing it for analysis.
Slave NPC. I have to admit that term makes me a little uncomfortable.
It is a provocative choice of words,
Yeah?
and it's something we could discuss further, but I think their point is to emphasize the tireless behind-the-scenes nature of this data wrangling role.
Okay, I can see that. So much manual labor that it takes off the shoulders of the human researchers.
Exactly. So we've got the lab boss keeping things in check, the slave NPC managing the data, but who's actually making sense of all this information?
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, that's where Heisenberg comes in.
Oh, I like it. They're having fun with these names.
Heisenberg is the designated data analysis guru, the one who takes all that raw data and cooks it into meaningful insights.
Okay, I'm loving the Breaking Bad reference, but can we break it down a little more? What exactly would Heisenberg be doing? We're not talking just like basic statistics here, right?
Oh no, they're proposing that Heisenberg would use like sophisticated algorithms and machine learning techniques to identify patterns and make predictions, and even suggest new avenues for research.
So it's not just about analyzing what's already happened. It's about using the data to figure out what might happen next.
Right, imagine a system that could analyze your experimental data in real time and then suggest adjustments to your protocol that might lead to a breakthrough.
Okay, now that's starting to sound like a true game changer, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole vertical operating system concept. Is it really that different from like existing lab management software?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the students do try to address that. See, most lab management systems are focused on just that managing. They help you organize data, schedule experiments, track inventory, but they're not really involved in the scientific process itself.
So you're saying this vertical operating system is more like an active participant in the research.
Right, constantly analyzing data, making suggestions, almost like a collaborator.
Wow, okay, starting to get the picture. Okay, so it's like this digital brain working alongside you in the lab, crunching numbers, spotting patterns you might miss, and helping you to refine your experiments in real time.
That's a great way to put it. It's a true partnership.
Okay, but let's say I'm a researcher. How does this actually change my day-to-day work? Do I even need to be in the lab anymore if this digital twin is doing everything for me?
Well, you'd still need to design the experiments and,
Mm.
interpret the results and actually draw the conclusions.
Of course.
But think about all the time you'd save by not having to manually record data and generate reports or even troubleshoot all those, technical glitches that always seem to come up.
Yeah, that does eat up a lot of time.
The digital twin would handle all that for you. So you'd be free to actually focus on the science.
So more time for brainstorming, collaborating with colleagues, maybe even, dare I say, having a life outside of the lab.
Exactly. And remember, this system is learning and adapting all the time. So the more data it gathers, the smarter it gets, and the better it can support your research.
So it's like it's becoming a better research partner over time.
Exactly. Imagine being able to run complex simulations within the digital twin and test out hypotheses virtually before you even set foot in the lab.
That could save a ton of time.
Months, even years of research time.
That's incredible. Okay, but let's talk about the elephant in the room here. That slave NPC and all the data it's handling, data security, is a huge concern these days, especially in research where you're dealing with sensitive information.
Hmm.
How do the students address that?
Yeah, they do acknowledge that data security is paramount, and they propose a few safeguards.
Like-
They talk about encryption protocols and access controls and even blockchain technology to make sure that the data is kept confidential and that the integrity of the data is maintained.
Okay, so they are thinking about it. But what about the ethical implications of having an AI basically running the show in the lab? I mean,
Well,
who's ultimately responsible if something goes wrong?
those are really good questions. And honestly, they go beyond the scope of this particular proposal. It's something I think that the scientific community as a whole really needs to think about as AI becomes more sophisticated.
It's not something we can just ignore.
Exactly. But the students do raise one point that I think is really interesting.
What's that?
They argue that a well-designed digital twin with all the appropriate safeguards in place could actually reduce the risk of errors and misconduct compared to the current system where so much relies on human fallibility.
So more transparency, less room for bias, and potentially fewer accidents.
Potentially. Yeah, it's a really intriguing argument.
It is, but I think it's important to remember that technology is just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It all comes down to how we choose to design it and implement it.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations now before this technology becomes so commonplace that we, lose sight of the potential risks.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits of this vertical operating system, like the increased efficiency, faster research, reduced risk of errors. But what about the limitations? Are there certain types of research where this system might not be a good fit?
That's a good question. The students mostly focus on life sciences in their proposal.
Right.
And it's pretty easy to see how a digital twin could totally revolutionize fields like, drug discovery and personalized medicine.
For sure.
But I think that the principles they outline could be applied to a lot of different disciplines, from material science to environmental research. Anything where you're dealing with complex systems and large amounts of data could benefit from this kind of approach.
So it's not limited to just one specific area of research.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. The inefficiency of traditional lab workflows, the potential for digital twins to address those inefficiencies, the specific roles of those lab NPCs, and the data security and ethical concerns.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But I think the big question is this just a futuristic fantasy, or is this something that could actually be implemented soon? What do you think?
I think that's the million-dollar question.
Okay.
And, the students' proposal is definitely ambitious, but they do make a strong argument that this vertical operating system is feasible. And they even outline like a roadmap for how to implement it, breaking the project down into smaller phases.
So it's not just wishful thinking. They've thought about the practical steps involved in making this happen.
Exactly. And that's what I find so exciting about this proposal. They've taken this like sci-fi concept of a digital twin and grounded it in reality.
So it's a real possibility.
It could be.
Well, that's incredible. So what does this mean for you, the listener? Why should you even care about this concept of digital twins in the lab?
Well, imagine a world where drug discovery is accelerated and personalized medicine is the norm, where scientific breakthroughs happen at an unprecedented pace.
Tie me up.
That's the promise of this technology.
But it's not just about the big discoveries, right? It's about the everyday work of scientists. All those countless hours spent on collecting data and analyzing results and troubleshooting experiments. What if all of that could be automated?
What if researchers were free to focus on the truly creative and intuitive human aspects of science?
That's a world I think we'd all like to see.
That's the world that these students are envisioning.
Yeah.
And I think it's a world worth striving for.
So what's next for this vertical operating system? Is it just a matter of time before we see digital twins running labs all over the world?
Yeah, that is the big question. Is it just a really cool idea, or is it the future of research? What do you think is the biggest hurdle to actually making this a reality? Honestly, I think the biggest challenge is going to be mindset. Like, it's a huge shift for researchers to go from being so hands-on with every aspect of their experiments to trusting an AI system to handle, so much of the process.
So it's not even really about the technology itself. It's more about overcoming that cultural resistance to change within the scientific community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of skepticism, a lot of "we've always done it this way," pushback. But I think once researchers start to see the real benefits, like the increased efficiency, the faster results, the reduced workload, I think those attitudes will start to change.
It's like with any new technology, right? There's always an adjustment period, figuring out how to integrate it into existing workflows.
Yeah.
But once people start seeing the value, the adoption rate usually takes off.
Yeah. And that's where the student's roadmap for implementation is really important. They've broken the whole process down into smaller, manageable steps, starting with pilot projects in very specific areas.
So instead of trying to overhaul an entire lab all at once, they're suggesting a more gradual approach.
Right. Prove the concept in a controlled environment first, and then scale up from there.
It's like they're building a proof of concept, not just for the technology, but for this whole new way of working, this collaboration between humans and AI.
Exactly. And those early adopters, the researchers who are willing to embrace this new paradigm, I think they're going to be the ones who really push the boundaries of scientific discovery. They're going to be the ones who show us what's possible when you combine human ingenuity with AI.
That is exciting. It's a pretty cool thought. And I think it raises a really interesting question for you, the listener. Imagine you're a researcher and you have this opportunity to implement this system in your lab, but it means changing how you've always worked, trusting in AI with things you've always done yourself. Would you take that leap?
It's a challenge for sure, but it's also a huge opportunity to embrace these new technologies without, losing sight of the risks, to use them to enhance what we can do, not to replace us. It's a delicate balance, but it's one we need to figure out if we want to keep pushing the boundaries of science.
And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. It's not just about the technology, it's about these much bigger questions about the future of work and the relationship between humans and AI, the very nature of scientific inquiry.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about. And I think it's pretty clear that the conversation about digital twins in the lab is just getting started.
Well, we're definitely going to keep following it here on the Deep Dive, so be sure to stay tuned for more deep dives into this and other cutting-edge topics. Until then, thanks for joining us on this journey into the future of research.
And keep exploring and keep questioning, keep imagining all the possibilities. The future is in our hands.